Hey, what's up, sports fans? Welcome to Common Sense Sports Talk. My name is Andrew Freeman, and today, in my first episode for this channel, I'm going to be talking about NBA free agency, the NBA offseason as a whole, and really just give you guys my thoughts on all the craziness that happened over the past month or so with everything that happened in the NBA. But before I really dive into that, I want to give you guys a little preview into this channel, give you guys some information on what to expect from this channel and really what my goals are for this channel as a whole and what I want this channel to eventually grow into. So I'm a diehard sports fan. I wouldn't be making this channel if I wasn't a diehard sports fan. And if you're anything like me, you like to go on social media and the media, any media format in general, and try and get as much information as you can on your sports teams and what's going on in the world of sports as a whole. And for me, one thing that I've been seeing that's kind of concerning to me as I look at the sports media landscape is that with social media and with so many people trying to make a name for themselves in this competitive field, I feel like there's been more of an emphasis on just making outrageous hot takes to try and generate some content for themselves, as opposed to just guys having a realistic discussion on what's going on in sports today with actual analysis. I think it's something that we're not getting enough of for normal sports fans like you and me. So for this channel, what I want this channel to really focus on is more on trying to facilitate more realistic discussions of sports by being as objective as possible. And I know it's really tough to be truly 100% objective. I'm a fan of teams. I'm a fan of players. I'm always going to be a fan first, so I know I'm not going to be 100% objective. But I'm going to do my best to take as much emotion as I can out of these videos and just try and give you my thoughts and how I see things. Tell it how I see it, basically. You won't always agree with me, and that's perfectly fine. That's what I want from this channel. I want you guys to be able to discuss what you guys think of what I'm discussing here. So in terms of the content of this channel, it'll be kind of a mix of me giving my thoughts on what's going on in the sports world of today. I'm going to primarily focus on the NFL and NBA, as those are the main sports leagues that I know the most. However, if anyone wants me to do a video on the MLB, NHL, and even college sports, I will be more than happy to do videos on those. So if you want to create a discussion with me, comment in the comment section below, please. Subscribe, please, to help this channel grow if you like the content that you're getting from me. And of course, follow me on social media. I'm going to be posting 2 Twitter accounts in the description below. One is my personal Twitter account, and the other is a Twitter account for this channel. I'll also be creating a Facebook page for this channel as well, where I will be sending updates on what I'm working on and where you can talk about me about more topics, because I can't possibly cover everything that's going on in the sports world today with the limited amount of time that I have to make videos. It's just not possible. So if you want to hear my thoughts on other topics in sports, please contact me on Twitter and on my Facebook page, and let's talk. That's just what I want this channel to be eventually grow into. So transitioning from that, let's get to the topic of today's episode, the NBA free agency period. And this was absolutely crazy. Going into this NBA offseason, I was very excited because the NBA, the last few seasons, let's just be honest here, I'm a huge NBA fan, but it was kind of boring to get through the regular season. It's kind of been a drag to get through the regular season. I'm a Chicago Bulls fan, and Chicago Bulls haven't been very good for me to watch. They're rebuilding right now, so it's kind of tough to watch every single game of theirs. And with the Warriors being so dominant over the past 5 seasons, it's kind of taken the competitive balance out of the game, especially when Kevin Durant moved there. It just hasn't been as intriguing for me to watch. And again, I'm a guy who loves watching the NBA. If there's an NBA or even a basketball game on in general, and I got nothing going on, I will watch it, over pretty much anything that's going on. I love watching basketball. That's really my main sport that I play when I played as a kid. So I just love basketball so much. And NBA, even though during the regular season you don't always get the greatest quality of play because, half the league is either actively tanking or half the league is, trying to kind of pace themselves for the playoffs. Still, it's the best of the best players, and I just love watching the NBA as a whole. So this NBA offseason was a critical one for me as a fan because it really could have gone in one of two directions. Either a new super team could be formed with all these superstar players now being free agents and a lot of teams having the cap space to go out and make some moves to go get these guys, or we could have gotten what we ended up getting, where a lot of superstars teamed up. There's a lot more duos out there, and the competitive balance of the league, I think, is in the best place it's been in at least a decade. The league is so competitive now on paper. And so for this video, I wanted to give you guys my thoughts on the winners and losers of the NBA offseason period. I'm going to start with the winners, and I'm going to give you guys 4 winners and losers. Four main winners and losers, but I will also discuss other signings and teams that I like what they did as well. So to start off with the winners, I think you have to start with the LA teams, with the Lakers and the Clippers. First with the Lakers, obviously their big move was to go and get Anthony Davis from the New Orleans Pelicans. And yeah, they overpaid big time, I think, but they kind of had to do it because with all the drama that ensued last season with basically the organization putting everyone besides LeBron James on the trading block, they just had to get the deal done. LeBron didn't really fit with those players, those young guys on that team in terms of just their on-court fit. Off the court, I think they gelled fine, but it just didn't really mesh very well on the court. And you saw that in the record when LeBron came back from injury. He wasn't 100% the same, I'd say, but you could just tell it wasn't working. So I think for the Lakers, they need to make a huge change this offseason. I think they did that by first getting Anthony Davis. So I'm going to give you guys the details of what happened in the trade. If you guys don't know everything that went down, there was a lot of moving parts. So the Pelicans in this deal, it was a 3-team deal. The Pelicans, they received Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, 3 first-round picks, including the number 4 pick in this past draft. And the Wizards eventually got in on the deal because the Lakers wanted to clear more salary cap space to go and sign another max free agent. So the Wizards took on Mo Wagner, Isaac Bonga, and Jamario Jones, his contracts, all those 3 of those minor contracts. And in exchange, the Lakers gave them a 2022 second-round pick for their trouble. So like I said before, the Lakers, I think they definitely did overpay a little bit for this deal. But, I mean, for a top 5 to 6 player like Anthony Davis, you kind of have to do that, especially in the state that the Lakers are in right now. LeBron's not getting any younger. He's only got 2 more guaranteed years on his contract and a player option. So really, you have a 2 to 3 year window where you can win a championship with LeBron James. And this trade with Anthony Davis, this definitely gives them a chance to win a championship in the Western Conference. When you look at both Anthony Davis and LeBron James as players, these are 2 guys that are about as elite as it gets in terms of total careers. Both of these guys are in the top 5 all-time in player efficiency rating, which is the advanced stat that I usually go to the most when I look at the overall efficiency of a player. It's not the only advanced stats that's the best, but it's the one that I go to just to see the quality of a player as a whole. Again, stats don't always tell the whole story, but you can definitely see that with these 2 guys. These guys are very impactful players. LeBron still is, even though he's not the same player. He's not the most dominant player in the NBA anymore. He's still a very, very great player. He's still an elite top 5 player in today's NBA. So yeah, it's a high-risk move. And I think for the Lakers, for this trade to really work out, they have to win a championship in the next 2 to 3 years. And with the extra cap space that they created, trading away guys like Wagner, guys like Bonga, and Jamario Jones, they opened up another max slot. And it was pretty clear that they were going for Kawhi Leonard with that max slot. And it just didn't work out for them. I'll get to the Clippers and Kawhi Leonard in a second here. But I think they did a pretty good job once they missed out on Kawhi Leonard of adding some pieces to this team that fit around LeBron a lot better than what they tried to do last year, where they tried to get a lot of ball handlers in there to try and take the load off of LeBron during the regular season. And it just doesn't work. If you're going to sign LeBron, you have to let LeBron do his thing and put the ball in his hands. So I thought they did a really nice job of getting players that are good 3-and-D options, guys that can spread the floor, and guys that are on manageable contracts for them so they can maintain some stability going into future off seasons. So let's look at some of the guys that they brought in. First, Danny Green. This is the guy that they signed pretty much right away once Kawhi Leonard was confirmed to be going to the Clippers. They signed him on a 2-year, $30 million contract. They ended up signing DeMarcus Cousins on a 1-year, $3.5 million deal. They brought in Avery Bradley on a 2-year deal. And then they filled out their bench with guys like Quinn Cook, Jared Dudley, and Troy Daniels, while also keeping guys from last year's team like Rajon Rondo, JaVale McGee, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And because they were able to keep Kyle Kuzma from the Anthony Davis trade, you look at this roster right now, and it's very interesting. I like it a lot more than last year's roster. It's clear that there is much more of a plan going into this offseason to build around their superstar talent. And I think this roster really fits very well together. Obviously, it's rumored that they're going to put LeBron at the point guard spot. Obviously, I don't think they'll have him as like the actual point guard, but he'll be the guy as the main ball handler now for this team rather than trying to distribute the ball around multiple ball handlers. So I think you can see a lineup that has Danny Green out there as maybe the starting one, and they can kind of fill their way around that with Avery Bradley maybe at the 2, maybe put Rondo at the 1 with Danny Green at the 2, but you're going to see LeBron James at the 3, obviously, and Anthony Davis at the 4, and they can put either JaVale McGee or Cousins at the 5, depending on who they want to come off the bench and make that impact with the second unit. There's a lot of different options they can do, but that's some of the good things that they did this offseason building around LeBron. They did a nice job, and I think they turned what could have been a dumpster fire this offseason if they didn't get Anthony Davis and they didn't get, guys that could really fit around LeBron, and they just tried to do what they did last season. They turned what could have been a dumpster fire into a legitimate contender. So with that, they have to be winners this offseason because even though I don't think they're the favorites, I'll get to who my favorites are in just a second here. They're definitely in a very good spot. So moving on to the team that I think definitely made themselves the favorites for the NBA championship coming up this next upcoming season, the Los Angeles Clippers have to be the second winners for this offseason period. And first, it starts with Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard played this offseason period masterfully, I thought. First, leveraging the Raptors and the Thunder against themselves with the services of Paul George, leveraging the Lakers, forcing them to kind of hold out on signing some of the bigger name role-playing free agents, and then going to Paul George, willing to go to a guy that had already signed a max contract with the Thunder and saying, hey, I want you to come play with me in LA. I know you want to be there. I know you like playing with Russ, but we can do something special together. That was a big power move by Kawhi. And I respect that he was willing to go out there and do it, even after winning a championship with the Toronto Raptors. Now, as an NBA fan, I honestly prefer that he stay with the Raptors just because I think, you win a championship there, you should stay there, I felt. I thought the Raptors were still a chance to win. I'll get to the Raptors later in this video when I get to the losers. But still, I thought the second best choice for Kawhi was to go to the Clippers. And honestly, if we're being honest here, the best choice for Kawhi Leonard, and taking my opinion out of it, was to go to the Clippers. I think that the Clippers, they had a great foundation established last season. And bringing in Paul George, you add Paul George to a team that was already a team that made the playoffs last season and gave the Warriors a pretty good fight in the first round. The Clippers did a masterful job. So let's talk about the deal that brought Paul George to the Los Angeles Clippers. They gave up an historic amount of draft picks in order to make this happen. But ultimately, if you're the Clippers, you kind of have to make this risk because the Clippers, this is their time. They have been the second fiddle team in LA for such a long time. They've been a dumpster fire of an organization for pretty much every year up until the past, 5 or so years, basically, up until they got Chris Paul. They've been just a dumpster fire of an organization. And now this is their first chance where they have the two dominant players, two MVP candidates, the best wing duo in the NBA. They had to make this happen. So they gave up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, a very promising point guard who I think is going to be a future All-Star. You had to get rid of him if you're going to really make this deal. Danilo Gallinari, good solid player. He's kind of on an interesting contract himself. He made the financials definitely work out for this deal, I thought. He's still got a lot left in the tank as an NBA player, but I think he's replaceable, obviously, when you can get Paul George for him. And then the draft picks. This is the part that was just crazy to me. So they gave up 4 unprotected first-round picks in 2021, 2022, 2024, and 2026. And while you may be thinking, well, how do they get first-round picks in back-to-back years? There's a rule against teams giving up first-round picks in back-to-back seasons. Well, that 2021 pick is the Miami Heat's first-round pick. So that gave them the flexibility to make that deal there. And we'll see how Miami is. But if Miami ends up not being as good as they want to be going forward, that could be a very nice pick for the Thunder. But going on to the other picks they gave up a lottery-protected first-round pick in 2023, and they gave the Thunder control of their picks in 2023 and 2025 with pick swaps. So basically, if the Clippers have a worse record than the Thunder in 2023 and 2025, the Thunder could take the Clippers pick in exchange for their pick that season to give them a higher pick in that draft. So basically, the Clippers just gave up their entire future to go all in right now. And this is something that they had to do. And I respect them for going forward, I think. This is a great move for them. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard together, I think they're going to dominate teams defensively. And they complement each other pretty well offensively as well, because both of these guys are comfortable being without the basketball. Both are capable of doing that, but they're also both capable of playing on the ball and being the main driving force of an offense. They both can take turns together and allow other players to make plays with them off the ball as well and kind of take a rest so they can play better defense. It's a perfect fit. Those two are going to be great together for the next couple of seasons. Kawhi Leonard only signed a 3-year deal, though, so it does give them a shorter contending window, because if things don't work out, or if they want to both do other things and go to other teams, they don't have that long-term stability now where they know that they had those guys locked up for 4 or 5 seasons. It's kind of like we have to win right now. But again, I totally respect that. So looking at the other moves that the Clippers made, they acquired Maurice Harkless in a 3-team trade. And they also retained a lot of key players from their team from last season's. Pat Beverly to be their starting point guard, a defensive specialist. Lou Williams, they kept him around. Montrezl Harrell, Ivica Zubac, they gave him a long-term extension. And they kept Landry Shamet to come off the bench as a shooter. And this roster is just stacked. So they have a lineup right now where they can have Patrick Beverly at the 1, Paul George at the 2, Kawhi Leonard at the 3, Mo Harkless as kind of like a stretch 4. Well, not really a stretch 4. He's not a great shooter, but he can defend the 4 because he's got great length and he's got pretty good size. He's a 6'8", long, athletic defender. And then you have Zubac at the center position. That's a very, very good center starting 5. And I just don't know, with the way the league is trending today, more towards wings and ball handlers, multiple ball handlers, I don't know how you can score, efficiently on this team with Pat Beverly, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and Harkless all just being in your face or on the perimeter. It's going to be tough for teams that have to score on them. It's just the defensive capability of this team is really out of this world. And then you combine that with guys like Lou Williams coming off the bench who can give you 20 a game, seemingly at will off the bench. He's probably the best 6-man in NBA history. Montrezl Harrell, an energy guy that if he had a bigger role, he could put up close to all-star production, I think, if he had a bigger role on another team. He's a great bench player coming off for them. And then Landry Shamet, this is a guy who shot in the mid-40s from three percentage-wise for an entire season, or at least when he was with the Clippers. He can really shoot it. He can defend, and he can also take some of the load in terms of ball handling, although that's not his primary role. He's more of a spot-up shooter, but he's a very effective spot-up shooter. Again, this is just a masterful move by the Clippers. This offseason was just a great for their organization as a whole. Jerry West, even though he's not technically the GM, I think he's still got a huge role in terms of running this organization. But he continues to prove himself as probably the greatest front office executive in NBA history. He was there for both Lakers dynasties in the 80s and the early 2000s with Shaq and Kobe, and then Magic Johnson in the 80s with Kareem. He was with the Memphis Grizzlies, getting them started when they moved there, bringing in Pau Gasol and kind of getting that team going to where they were a consistent playoff team in the mid-2000s for a little bit. And then he was part of the Golden State Warriors, getting that team to where they were today. And then now with the Clippers, he's working his magic once again. He's an absolute genius, probably, again, the greatest front office executive in NBA history. And I'm just hats off to him. This is a great offseason for the Clippers. And you just got to love what they did to put themselves in the position where they are now the favorite in the NBA as a whole for the championship. Absolutely a great offseason for them. So moving on to my other winners for this NBA offseason, I think you have to look at the other end of the Lakers deal with the New Orleans Pelicans. And again, they really recovered from what could have been a disastrous situation, much like the Lakers. And they really turned in a very nice offseason, I felt. First of all, with the Anthony Davis trade, all that they got in return, they got some really nice pieces to build for going into the future, and guys that can contribute right now and help them win in a competitive Western Conference. You look at Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart. Those are guys that all have really high ceilings, I think, to be contributors on playoff-level teams in the NBA. Lonzo Ball, even though I think he gets a lot of flack from NBA fans, obviously the hype with his dad has really put the spotlight on him, and he hasn't really lived up to expectations so far. I think he's a very good point guard still in today's NBA. He's got the shooting deficiencies. He's got to work on his free throw shooting, and he's got to continue to work on his body to get stronger, and he's got to stay healthy. That's really the main thing. But he's a top-level defensive point guard. He's a great passer. He's got great length, and he's still got a lot of upside still. I think the best basketball is ahead of him going into New Orleans, where he's got the opportunity to run the show at the point guard spot. And then you bring in Brandon Ingram, who hopefully he's okay with the blood clots. That was a big major question mark for him going into this offseason was, Chris Bosh, he had those similar blood clot issues that ended his career. Obviously, Ingram's aren't as severe. He's going to be back out there playing. From what I've heard, he's ready to go. But he's got pretty good upside as well. He's very good with the ball in his hands as a scorer, and he's got a high upside. So that was a good move to bring him in, I felt like, as a young player to build around. And then Josh Hart, he's a guy that I think is going to be a great role player in this league for a long time as a 3-and-D type of player. And then with the 3 first-round picks, that was great for them to get some added first-round picks to help reshape this roster around the guy that they were fortunate enough to get the number 1 overall pick. I don't know how David Griffin does this, but every single time it seems like he's in the lottery, his team gets the number 1 overall pick. It makes no sense. There's no logic to it. Maybe it's rigged. Maybe it's the NBA being rigged, but whatever it is, the Pelicans got fortunate once again to get the number 1 overall pick and got one of the best prospects that we've seen in a long time, maybe since the best prospects since Anthony Davis in 2011, I think it was, or was it 2012? It was one of those years. But Zion Williamson, bringing him in now to this young core that they established by trading away Anthony Davis and also keeping Drew Holiday, that is a big-time move. That is absolutely a franchise-changing move for this Pelicans team. Where as opposed to when they drafted Anthony Davis, they really didn't have anything to build around him. With the move that they made to get rid of Anthony Davis and bring in some young assets, they now have a young core where they can build around Zion Williamson and have some success right out of the gate. And then you combine that to what they did, maneuvering themselves in the draft, trading back from the number 4 overall pick that they got from the Lakers back to 8 with the Atlanta Hawks, as well as acquiring the 17th overall pick. They were able to unload Solomon Hill's contract, which was a pretty bad contract for a guy who's a nice role player, but he definitely should not be making the money that he was making, at least not on a competitive team. And then to use the number 8 overall pick to get Jackson Hayes, center out of Texas, super athletic, great shot blocker, athletic dunker. We saw what he did in the summer league, absolutely destroying my Bulls in the summer league with that monstrous dunk that went viral. This kid's got a lot of potential. He's not going to contribute, I think, right away. He's going to take a few years for him to really work on his body and work on his NBA skill set, but there's a lot of tools there for him to develop into a Rudy Gobert, Clint Capella type of player, where he's a vertical spacer in the pick and roll. He's a rim protector. He runs the floor. He can do all that stuff, I think, eventually down the line for this Pelicans teams. And David Griffin, he said in his introductory press conference, I think for the draft, once they picked these guys, he envisions a future where you have Lonzo Ball running the ball down the middle with the ball in his hands in the fast break, Zion Williamson on one wing, Jackson Hayes on the other wing, and that is just scary, I think, long-term for NBA teams to have to deal with. But moving on to who else they got in that trade with the Hawks, they end up getting Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the draft as well, a very nice all-around player who can do a lot of different things for you to help contribute to a basketball team. Played very well during the summer league, although that really doesn't have much weight to it in terms of transferring over to NBA success. But he's a solid overall player, and he doesn't really have the highest upside, but I think he's a guy that can contribute right away and be a pretty darn good role player for a contending and competitive team in the playoffs. So moving on from the draft, I thought they also did a really good job in free agency, kind of supplementing this young core with guys that can help them bring in a veteran presence into the locker room here for this team. They signed J.J. Redick to a 2-year deal, which was very surprising. I did not expect that. I thought the 76ers would have made much more of an effort to keep him because he was so critical to that team. He really had a career best season last year, averaging 18 points a game. And, of course, his shooting is magnificent. He's one of the best shooters in the NBA, one of the best shooters in NBA history. And to bring him in there, whether he's coming off the bench for this team or whether he's in the starting lineup next to Drew Holiday, that's a really nice signing for them. Add some more spacing for Zion to do work, whether he's down low or another guy to space the floor when Zion drives. Really nice signing there. And then they acquired Derek Favors from the Utah Jazz for 2 future second-round picks. Again, there's really no risk there in taking him on. He's a solid NBA player, maybe not the player a lot of people expected him to be coming out of Georgetown such a long time ago in the draft, where he was the 4th overall pick in the 2010 NBA draft. Hasn't really lived up to his expectations, but he's really found a role for himself in the NBA, a solid 4/5. Really nice player, add some defense, add some rebounding, add some toughness, a pretty good finisher around the rim. Another solid signing, and he takes a load off of Zion Williamson down low to where Zion Williamson doesn't have to bang down low as much as he would maybe without another big guy to kind of help him out there. So with all these moves that were made, I thought the Pelicans did a nice job, and I think they might be the rare team to where they can lose an elite top 5 talent and actually improve. I thought their team might have gotten better despite losing an elite superstar. This really never happens in the NBA because it's such a superstar-driven league. But getting lucky and getting the number 1 overall pick, and then with all the moves that they made to kind of help him out, hats off to David Griffin and the New Orleans Pelicans for making some really nice moves to put themselves in a good position to where they can not only compete long-term and really build this thing to a long-term success, but they can also compete in the short term and maybe push for a playoff spot this upcoming season. Really nice job for them. And then another winner, Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, it comes down to their two big signings, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. We kind of knew going into this offseason and really the entire year as a whole that these two guys were looking to play with each other. Um, Going into this offseason, they wanted to sign with each other. A lot of people thought that they wanted to go to New York with the Knicks, but the New York Knicks, they're the Knicks. They're kind of a mess still, even though they got some good people in there with the head coach and the GM. It's still not an ideal situation. Definitely not as good as it is with the Nets. That's probably why they decided to go to Brooklyn. And I also like what they did in terms of surrounding their stars with role players that can really contribute and kind of fit around their skill sets. They brought in DeAndre Jordan on a 2-year deal. And while I feel like that wasn't really necessary because they have Jared Allen, who's already an ascending young player who's going to be a very good rim protector and vertical spacer on offense, still getting more depth there. He's a good friend of Kevin Durant, so I think that's why they brought him in to kind of help entice Kevin Durant in joining the team. Garrett Temple, a 3-and-D guy, probably won't play too much, but he'll get some minutes off the bench. Wilson Chandler, a guy who can score off the bench for you. And a personal favorite of mine, David Nwaba. He was with the Bulls a couple seasons ago. Very good defensive player. Can't really shoot very well, but he plays with a lot of energy, and he's a guy that does a lot of the dirty work for a team. And you need those type of guys if you're going to be competing for a championship and for a playoff spot. And then one move they made before free agency, really before the draft, was they traded for Taurean Prince in order to unload Alan Crabb's contract. Now, they did have to get rid of a draft pick in order to make this move, but I think Taurean Prince is a solid player as a wing guy. He can play 3-and-D as well. And Alan Crabb, just that contract was ridiculous. Not a good contract whatsoever. A bad signing for them. So with these moves that they were made, the Nets put themselves where they now have about a 3 or 4 year window to really compete for a championship. However, it's not going to be this season. They're going to be a playoff team this next upcoming season once again, with Kyrie as kind of being the lone star for them. But with Durant, with the torn Achilles, which it's very unfortunate that he tore his Achilles, just a really sad moment. You don't really know if he's going to be the same player as he once was. And that's what makes this move kind of risky for the Nets, is that you just don't know if Durant is the same type of player as he was. And with Kyrie, there's the risk that, he's not the greatest leader in the locker room as well. It wasn't the same situation last year with Boston because there was just so many egos on that team as a whole. But there are some parallels in that. The Brooklyn Nets team last year was a team that overachieved. They had a nice head coach. They have a lot of young role players that their coaching staff was able to get the most out of. It kind of compares to what the Boston Celtics were before Kyrie was traded there, where they were just a lot of young players who overachieved. And one game is based off of execution and their chemistry together. That's kind of what the Brooklyn Nets were last season, although to a lesser degree. And now you bring Kyrie Irving, who did not have really good success as a leader in that type of situation. You're hoping that with Kevin Durant there with him, though, that it kind of works itself out in terms of that way. But if you're the Nets, they haven't really been a relevant team since Jason Kidd was their only legitimate superstar in the early 2000s. So they kind of had to make this move, I feel like. And they really didn't sacrifice any of their future either. They still have some young players on this roster that they could build around once this championship window is done. And they have a really good chance in the next couple seasons after this upcoming season to be in the race for a championship, definitely. So a nice move by the Brooklyn Nets to put themselves as the number one team in New York now. The New York Knicks are no longer the number one team. It's now the Brooklyn Nets. It's their time in New York. And with these two guys who wanted to play with each other, they're really good friends off the court. They're in a really nice spot right now. And then finally, my last winner for this NBA offseason period was OKC Thunder, and which is kind of weird because they unloaded 2 superstar players. And usually that's not a good offseason for a team when they have to get rid of talent like that. But it was evidence when you watched them last season that they really reached their ceiling with Westbrook and Paul George in terms of what they could do in the playoffs. They lost in the first round for the 3rd year in a row. The second year where they had both Paul George and Russell Westbrook on the roster, And really, it wasn't even close. Portland was running circles around them really the entire series. They just didn't have a chance in that one. So it was evident they had to shake things up. And when Paul George went to their Sam Presti, the GM, and said he wanted out, I think Sam Presti saw the opportunity and he made the most of it. And when you look at what they got in return for both Russell Westbrook and Paul George, it really is ridiculous. When you put both trades together, with Russell Westbrook being traded to the Houston Rockets and Paul George going to the Clippers, the Thunder have acquired 7 unprotected future first-round picks, 4 pick swaps, a solid role player into Neil Gallinari who can play the stretch 4 for them, and a point guard of the future that they can build around in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. That's an unprecedented haul that Sam Presti was able to pull off here. And while you can say it's definitely disappointing that the Thunder, who had really 3 superstars on the team at the same time with Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, and James Harden in the early 2000s, that they weren't able to get a championship out of that. And that is definitely a big disappointment. That's one of the what-if storylines of really the past decade in sports, is what this OKC Thunder could have been. But in terms of when you look at it, what they had to do for the future of this franchise, these are moves that they had to make to put themselves in a spot where they can have a future, because they were in cap hell already. They were spending a ridiculous luxury tax, and as a smaller market team, it just really didn't make sense to spend all that money when you're not going to be competing for a championship. So this is something they had to do. And unfortunately, they're stuck with Chris Paul's contract as a result of the Houston Rockets trade. But I think there will be some team desperate enough to trade for Chris Paul in his contract. It's maybe the worst contract in the NBA, maybe next to John Wall's contract with the Washington Wizards. But I don't think it's as bad now that when you look at the Thunder right now as it could be. I don't think it's the worst situation in the world. It's not ideal, but it's something that they can live with because they got just an unprecedented haul of young players and draft picks that they can use to make this team really competitive down the line once they establish to their rebuild. So those are my winners for this past offseason period. Now I'm going to go to some other signings that I liked. The Pacers, I really like what they did as well. Signing Malcolm Brogdon away from the Milwaukee Bucks, that was a huge signing for them. They had to give up a couple draft picks in order to do it, but I think that was definitely worth it. Malcolm Brogdon now with Victor Oladipo, if Victor Oladipo can come back healthy, you're looking at a backcourt there where that could be maybe the best defensive backcourt in the NBA if Victor Oladipo is healthy. So I really like what the Pacers did there, really setting up their backcourt of the future. Brogdon's a 50-40-90 guy. He's a guy that can play both with the ball in his hands and off the ball as a spot-up shooter. He shot 50-40-90 last season, which even in today's shooting league is very hard to do. Not really many players do that, and he was able to do that last year. Very efficient. Complements Oladipo well, I think. And then you look at one other move they made this offseason, trading for TJ Warren, and they got a first-round pick from the Phoenix Suns in return. Like, that was just ridiculous. That's just, like, unfair. That's the type of move that you make in NBA 2K, and it's just, like, completely lopsided in favor of the Pacers there. It was clear that the Suns wanted to get rid of TJ Warren's contract, but I didn't think they would be desperate enough to give up a first-round pick in order to do it. That just didn't make any sense. And there's a story that when the Pacers got the call from the Suns to make that deal, they thought it was a joke at first. So really nice move for the Pacers. TJ Warren gives them another scoring option, a guy who can play the 3 or the 4 for their team. Nice move for them. Another move that I liked, Jimmy Butler going to the Miami Heat. A lot of people expected the 76ers to make a big push to keep him in town with the 76ers to kind of take advantage of the championship window that they got right now. But I think Jimmy Butler, he saw what Pat Riley was selling him in Miami, and I think this is a perfect fit for both sides here. Jimmy Butler fits the culture that Pat Riley has established with the Miami Heat, going back all the way to the mid-'90s when he was the head coach there. Now as an executive working for the Heat, this is a perfect move, I think, for Jimmy Butler in terms of he just fits their organization like a glove. And it doesn't put the Miami Heat in contention or anything like that, but it does make them a better team. It makes them a viable competitive team in the Eastern Conference for a playoff spot. And if they can bring – I know Jimmy Butler doesn't want another star probably because he wants to be the number one guy. And that's probably his biggest flaw as a player is that he's a number two who thinks he's a number one. But, I mean, it's a great place for him to be the guy in the short term until they can figure out a way to get another star player to help him out with Miami. Another move I liked, the Jazz, what they were able to do, bringing in Mike Conley. They had to trade Grayson Allen, Kyle Korver, Jay Crowder, and the 23rd pick, as well as the future 2020 lottery-protected pick. But that's a great move for them. It was obvious that Ricky Rubio just didn't really fit, or he just wasn't a great player for them at the point guard position. Ricky Rubio is a solid player, but he's definitely not Mike Conley, who's yearly one of the most underrated players in the NBA. Every single year, no one talks about him because he's playing in Memphis and he doesn't get the accolades, and he's not on an all-star team because the Western Conference is so stacked every single year at the point guard position. But he's a guy that makes the Utah Jazz legitimate contenders now, I think, in the Western Conference, although maybe not on the level of the Clippers, definitely, or maybe not even the Lakers. But with him and Donovan Mitchell in the backcourt, you still got Rudy Gobert at center. Man, the Jazz have a really nice team, I think, going into this next season. They did a really nice job there. The Celtics, I also like what they did. Obviously, losing Kyrie Irving, it's not ideal to lose a superstar like him. And then, losing Al Horford, which is the reason they're not winners in this offseason, because they totally expected to keep Al Horford, and that's a huge loss for them. But I thought they recovered pretty well from those two losses and were able to reload going into this next season. They brought in the two main signings. They brought in Kemba Walker and Enes Kanter. Kemba Walker gained that max contract. He plays very similarly to Kyrie Irving, in that both are ball-dominant point guards who can make plays in the pick and roll. Kemba Walker, I think, fits much better, though, with the chemistry of this team. And he can play a little bit more off the ball. He's willing to move without the basketball a little bit more than Kyrie Irving, which fits what Brad Stevens wants to do from an X and O's perspective. And the Enes Kanter, obviously, he's one of the worst defensive big men in basketball, but he is so good on offense in terms of getting putbacks on offense. He's very efficient in the post. And I think he helps out the offense part of this team. You can't replace Al Horford and what he meant to them on defense, but you can still get some production out of your center position offensively with Enes Kanter and replicate what you were able to do with Al Horford over the past few seasons there, although they have kind of different skill sets. It was nice to get him on a low deal that they were able to get. And then the Celtics, because they have seemingly a ridiculous amount of draft picks every single year, I thought they were able to add some young talent in the draft that they can use either as trade chips or guys that can potentially contribute for them down the road. You look at Romeo Langford, who they got the 14th overall pick. I'm not really super high on him, but he's a guy that can definitely score the basketball. He reminds me a lot of Jeremy Lamb when he was coming out of UConn. Not a great shooter necessarily, maybe not as good as a shooter as Jeremy Lamb was, but he's a very smooth player. He's got a good handle on the ball for being 6'5", 6'6", pretty good length, and he just knows how to score. And if he can be a poor man's Jason Tatum for this team coming off the bench, so you can kind of replicate that production, I think that would be a good pick. Then they end up getting Grant Williams from Tennessee, who, again, they're looking to replace Al Horford in so many ways. Grant Williams is not going to be as good defensively as Al Horford, especially not right away, because rookies, it's tough for them to really contribute defensively in the NBA. But Grant Williams does a lot of the same things that Al Horford does on the offensive side in terms of being a guy that you can give the ball at the high post or around the three-point line, and you can run a lot of action with your other players in off-ball screens, and he can find the open man pretty easily. He's a very good passer, and he's a very strong finisher around the rim. So I thought that was a great steal for them. Definitely doesn't have the highest upside in the world, but he can be a very good role player for this team and contribute right away. And then later in the draft, they got Carson Edwards, guard out of Purdue, who they knew they were losing Terry Rozier going to this offseason. That's part of the sign and trade that they got for Kemba Walker. But Carson Edwards is a guy that's an attacking score-first point guard. really more of a combo guard, actually. And Brad Stevens knows how to get the most out of his point guard. So I thought bringing a guy like Carson Edwards, who can contribute right away, who spent 4 years in college, that's a nice draft pick for them. He could be a nice little steal for them as a backup point guard for them. And then finally, the last team that I thought did a pretty nice job had to be the Golden State Warriors. I have to say it. Even though obviously you'd think they'd be losers, losing Kevin Durant and then Klay Thompson being injured and missing at least half of this next upcoming season, if not more. The fact that they were able to get something for Kevin Durant and D'Angelo Russell, even though they had to give up Andre Iguodala, a key part of their bench in that deal, I thought that was a nice move for them. He's a guy that does fit with Steph Curry on offense in terms of even though Steph Curry is the point guard, D'Angelo Russell is a guy that's very good with the ball in his hands. And Steph Curry is a guy that he's just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, without the ball because of the gravity that he does in terms of sucking the defense towards him. So D'Angelo Russell was a nice signing, I thought, to really make up for that. So continuing on to my losers for the NBA offseason, I have to start with the Charlotte Hornets. And again, I don't know what they're doing. I really don't. So they lost Kemba Walker, which to me is just unacceptable. Because when you look at the Supermax and what it was designed for small market teams like the Charlotte Hornets to be able to have more of an incentive given to a player to keep their star players around. And the fact that they did not take advantage of this by even offering the Supermax, by lowballing Kemba Walker, who's been the best player in franchise history, really the only bright spot for this organization over the past few seasons. They have so many bad contracts on this team. They're consistently stuck in mediocrity. If you're not willing to give Kemba Walker the max contract, then you should have just traded him this past season and try to get as much as you could. But they were just too stubborn to do that. They wanted to try and make a push for the playoffs and try and get an 8 seed when really that does nothing for you. Even though they fixed the lottery to a degree, being stuck as an 8 seed doesn't really give you anything in the NBA still. And then they make up for not giving Kemba Walker what he deserved and what was a Supermax contract for them by completely overpaying for Terry freaking Rozier on a 3-year, $56 million deal. I mean, are you kidding me? We're basing this off of one playoff run where he was pretty dang good in the playoffs a couple of seasons ago when Kyrie Irving got hurt. But when you look at Terry Rozier as a player, he's a career 38% shooter from the field. That's not from three. That's his overall shooting percentage from the field, 38%. And you're going to give this contract off of one playoff run where he gave you some pretty dang good production. It's just, I don't know. I just don't see it. I don't see what the Charlotte Hornets are doing. And this is why they're stuck in mediocrity, because they keep on giving big contracts to guys who don't deserve it. First is Nicholas Batum with his big contract that's one of the worst in the NBA. It's just further proof that the Hornets have no idea what they're doing. As great as Michael Jordan is as a player, he's just continues to be just not very good as an executive whatsoever. Another loser I thought for this offseason period was the Toronto Raptors. Obviously, it just comes down to losing Kawhi Leonard. And the fact that even though, they got their championship, I think the Toronto Raptors will definitely take winning the championship and losing Kawhi after that because, they haven't had a championship in the NBA ever. So, I mean, that was a great season for them last season. And I think if Masai Ujiri could do it all over again, he would do the exact same thing. Nothing replaces a championship, obviously. But it was a tough decision to make whether they should – I think they're in a tough decision now whether they should rebuild or not because they still have some talent on this team where they can make the playoffs, I think. When you look at – they still have Marc Gasol, Kyle Lowry's still on the team, Serge Ibaka's still on the team. And then they have Pascal Siakam, who's one of the rising stars of the NBA. He's a flat-out stud. I think he can absolutely be an all-star for many years to come. The Raptors, whatever they decide to do, they have to keep Pascal Siakam because he's a great young player. I think if they do keep this core together, they'll be competitive this next season. They just won't be contending in any way, shape, or form. Which honestly, I don't think that's a terrible move if they decide to keep this core together for this next season at the very least, because you just won the championship. You want to have you still want to have some good faith with the fans within Toronto. So I think it makes sense to have kind of a honeymoon year coming off the championship where you're competitive, you're in the playoffs, and then give this group one last go, and then blow it up by getting rid of some of your veteran players. Then I think that's the best way for this team to go, because with the way the NBA lottery percentages are right now, there really is no incentive to tank, really, unless you're getting a huge haul in draft picks. And there's really no one on this team where I think they could get a huge haul if they try to trade them at this point. So I think it's better off that they try and be competitive for this upcoming season. But, yeah, it's definitely a huge loss to lose Kawhi Leonard, who might be, if he's not the best player in the NBA, he's definitely top 3 right now. So it stings that you couldn't create a long-term championship window with him there. But the fact that they were able to get a championship, in some ways they're not losers. They're still winners in that sense. But I have to make them losers here because that was their main goal this offseason was keeping Kawhi Leonard, and they failed. It's simple as that. So moving on to another loser for this offseason, the New York Knicks. And I don't think it's as bad as some may perceive it. They still have a young core and Kevin Knox, RJ Barrett, and Mitchell Robinson that looks pretty promising going forward. And Julius Randle, I thought, was a pretty solid signing. And it's a 3-year deal for about $20 million per year, but it doesn't hamstring them long term. And when you look at some of the upcoming free agents, there really isn't any big names coming out the next 2 off seasons anyway. So it makes sense to use that cap space on a player like Julius Randle, who helps you now to be more competitive in the short term. But they had to be losers because they didn't trade Kristaps Porzingis and clear out 2 max slots to sign nobody, to sign Julius Randle. They just didn't. They were looking for big-time max free agents like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. You knew that they were expecting those 2 guys to come to them, and they didn't make it happen. And maybe that's just the way the organization is right now, with there still being some dysfunction with ownership and with it being really unclear about who they can really build around on this team right now. But it stinks for New York right now that Durant and Kyrie going to Brooklyn, and now makes the Knicks the second most important team in New York when they've always been the number 1 attraction in New York in terms of basketball. Madison Square Garden will not have the same appeal this season and going into the future as it did in the past. So that was just unfortunate for them, and that's as simple as that. They missed out on the big name free agents that they were going after. And because of that, you have to consider this offseason a failure. That is what it is. And then my final loser for this NBA offseason period, it might surprise you. I haven't mentioned them yet. Some of you might think that it could be in the winners category, but I think the Houston Rockets are big-time losers here, and not many people are talking about them like that. And the reason I think this is because it was pretty clear all offseason that they were desperate. They made it clear from the very jump. They made it known that basically everyone on the roster was on the trading block. And I don't know why they would let that information come out, because a team like the Thunder is going to use that information against you and try and get anything that they can in a trade from you, because they know that you're desperate and you will do anything to try and make marginal improvements to this team. And that is ultimately what I think the Russell Westbrook trade is. It's a marginal improvement, but they overpaid to go get him. And it's a huge risk that I just don't think will work. I just don't see it. So with the specifics of a trade, I mentioned it earlier, but the Rockets gave up 4 first-round picks, 2 unprotected in 2024 and 2026, and then pick swaps in 2021 and 2025. And I know they were able to get rid of Chris Paul's contract in this trade, and And on its own, that's a great move because Chris Paul's contract, like I said, it's a terrible contract. It's one of the worst in basketball. But let's be honest here. Russell Westbrook is just as bad, not only a little bit better than Chris Paul's. It's still one of the worst contracts in the NBA because he's 31 right now, and he's an athletic guard with really limited skill. And just thinking about this here, when Russell Westbrook is 34 on the last year of his contract, he's going to be making $47 million, I believe, around that number. Chris Paul, we started to see him decline at the age of 34, and he doesn't utilize his athleticism or rely on it anywhere near as much as Russell Westbrook does. Chris Paul is a much better fit on this team in terms of having the ability to play off the ball and having the ability to play defense for certain stretches of the game that Russell Westbrook just doesn't do. Russell Westbrook is one of the worst shooters in basketball, like, period. He's not a good shooter. And I know him and James Harden are best friends off the court. They wanted to make this happen. They wanted to play together, but I just don't see the fit here. And it just – Westbrook has no value off the ball. You got two guys here, James Harden and Russell Westbrook, that have two of the highest usage percentage seasons in NBA history. These are two guys that need the ball in their hands to be successful. And now they're on the same team together. I just don't think it's going to work. And you may point to their days in Oklahoma City when they were teammates back all the way in 2012, and they had some success there. They made it to an NBA Finals. They ended up losing, but they made it to an NBA Finals as a very young team. But I will point out to you that their roles on that team were a lot different than it's going to be on this team right now. James Harden was coming off the bench. He was a sixth man at that point. Now, everyone knew that he had all-star potential and that if he had the opportunity to be the number one guy, that he could be a number one player, but he wasn't at that level yet. He was still just a guy that came off the bench and got buckets for you off the bench. I mean, the Thunder would finish games with Russell Westbrook and James Harden on the floor together, but for the majority of the game, they always switched off Russell Westbrook and James Harden of who got to be on the floor at the same time, because the Thunder were smart enough to know that both of them can't be on the floor at the same time because they both require the ball to be at their best. And that's one of the problems that the Houston Rockets are going to have. Yes, they're going to be able to switch them off on the court together because as one can go to the bench, the other can stay on the floor and stuff like that. But they're going to spend a lot of time on the floor together. And I just don't see the fit, especially in today's NBA, where it's a lot different than 2012. It's much more of a shooting league. You need more spacing in the NBA if you're going to be effective. And Russell Westbrook doesn't give you any shooting. At least Chris Paul, even though he's not the same player, he's not nearly as good as Russell Westbrook is as an individual player. He can at least give you some value off the ball as a spot-up shooter. Russell Westbrook just gives you none of that, and he doesn't move without the basketball because he always has relied on being a ball-dominant player first. So while the Rockets, their potential is higher. If it works, then they absolutely could be contenders in the Western Conference for the NBA championship. But man, I just don't see it. And I think this is a move that it doesn't make them that much better in the short term, and it completely depletes their future in terms of future assets that they can use when their run as a playoff team is eventually over. So that's my biggest fear for them, is that they're going all in right now, and I don't even know if they're a top 4 team in the Western Conference, let alone the NBA. I mean, the Clippers are better than them. The Lakers are better than them. I'd even give Denver an edge maybe at this point because I think Nikola Jokic is probably the best big man in basketball outside of Anthony Davis. And then I'd probably take Utah over the Rockets. So I don't even know if they're a top 4 team in the Western Conference. I just saw no need for them to make this move outside of, making a way to get rid of Chris Paul's contract, because their only big flaw in the last few seasons was that they just couldn't get past the Warriors. Well, the Warriors, they're not the same team anymore. So you don't have to worry about them as much. If you brought back the same group you had just as good of a chance of winning a championship, I think, as you do now. And you still have some future assets that you can use down the line. So, I don't know. I just did not get that. Daryl Morey, he's one of the best GMs of basketball. I really love him as an executive. I think he's a great executive, very smart. But I think you could definitely tell that he was desperate going into this offseason. And when you're desperate, you make moves like this. So moving on from my losers, I'm going to look at some signings that I just did not like in general, but I don't think they're overall losers as a whole. The 76ers, I thought they did a nice job with some things, bringing in Josh Richardson for Jimmy Butler in that signing trade. But then they went out and signed Al Horford, and Al Horford still is a very good player. Don't get me wrong, but to me, it's just an odd fit when you have Embiid and Simmons to have two traditional big men on the floor at the same time, and then a guy like Ben Simmons who can't shoot still. I don't know. It's a weird fit. They're going to be good on defense, but in today's NBA where teams are going more athletic and more towards small ball lineups, it's also kind of an odd fit defensively because you have two traditional big men, and one of them is going to have to guard around the perimeter on smaller players. So that's just an odd fit for me personally to kind of see working. A lot of people are high on the 76ers as the best team in the Eastern Conference, and I don't know if I see it at this point. I gotta see it work first for me really to tell whether they're losers or not in this NBA offseason period, because it could very well work out because Al Horford is a very smart player, a very good player, but it just seems odd to me. But, I mean, the one thing I didn't like about their offseason was that, yes, you lose Jimmy Butler, which may not be the worst thing in the world, but Jimmy Butler was their closer last season. But you use the money that you could have used on Jimmy Butler to re-sign Tobias Harris to a near max extension. And I'm sorry, Tobias Harris is not a max player. He did not do anything for them in the playoffs, and that might have been a chemistry issue with all the pieces, so many stars on one team. There's only one ball on the court, so not everybody can do their thing, but I just don't see it. Tobias Harris, he's a really good player. I just don't see him as a max player. And I think with the moves that they have made now with these big contracts given out, it really limits their flexibility long term. I mean, this is it. This is their roster. This is their championship window roster for the next couple seasons. They really can't make any other major moves besides this, maybe other than tinkering with their bench a little bit. This is it. They have to win a championship with this group, and we'll see how it works out for them. Another move I did not like, Ricky Rubio to the Suns, and it's not that the Suns it's not that Ricky Rubio is necessarily a bad player. I kind of like him in some respects. I mean, he gets injured. He's not a great shooter. He's not really as good as he once was, but man, they just overpaid for him. They definitely overpaid for him. He's going to be making $19 million a year, I believe. Just not a big fan of that value right there. I know the Suns desperately needed a point guard to complement Devin Booker, who's an absolute star, by the way. But, man, and losing assets in order to dump T.J. Warren and Josh Jackson. I know they had to get rid of Josh Jackson because he's just a mess off the court, but just a weird offseason for the Suns. And then what they did in the draft, I wasn't a huge fan. So just overall weird offseason for the Suns, but we'll see. They've been stuck in the Western Conference cellar for such a long time. We'll see if these moves will help them in any way, shape, or form. And then the Kings re-signing Harrison Barnes. Harrison Barnes is a nice player, but, I mean, they totally overpaid for him in this contract. And honestly, I thought the Kings actually had a much better roster going forward before they traded for Harrison Barnes than when they did after. I'm not sure if Harrison Barnes fits because I think he takes away touches from guys like Buddy Hield and De'Aaron Fox and Marvin Bagley. He takes away touches from them. And it just seemed to kind of mess with the chemistry that they had going early on in the year last season. I'm just not sure if this is a nice long-term fit. I mean, this is kind of what the Kings do. They overpay for mediocre talent, much like the Charlotte Hornets. This is what Vlade Divac does as an executive. But I don't know. I just wasn't a fan of that. I'm still high on the Kings and their future because I really like what they did last season. But I don't know about that one. And then one final final team that I wouldn't necessarily call losers, but they definitely did not get better this offseason. The Milwaukee Bucks, really a really big blow for them, losing Malcolm Brogdon to the Indiana Pacers, a division rival. Again, they got some draft picks out of it, so they did get something for him. But yeah, that's a big loss because I thought, honestly, if I were the Milwaukee Bucks going into this offseason, I think they should have actually prioritized Malcolm Brogdon over Chris Middleton, because Chris Middleton, he's a very nice player, but Brogdon was going to be a cheaper option with Middleton being eligible for the max extension, which he did get. I think he got a little bit less than the max extension, but again, still, Brogdon was going to be a cheaper player. And I think Brogdon's a more important player to the Bucks than Middleton is. Middleton's a great scorer. He's a nice all-around player, but I think the value he brings to the Bucks is a lot less than what Brogdon does, because Brogdon is a better defender than Middleton is. He's a little bit more of an efficient player, and he doesn't need the ball in his hands. I mean, Middleton, he's a good spot-up player as well, but I think if I were the Bucks, I would have kept Brogdon over Middleton because Brogdon's younger, he fits well, and yeah, that's just a tough loss for them. And also losing Nikola Mirotic, who took a big contract to go back overseas to Europe. That's a big loss for them as well, although he didn't really contribute much to them last season because they traded for him mid-season, and he got injured right away, and he just never found his role on the team. But I thought Mirotic is a solid player. I think he could have contributed a lot to a roster that one of the strengths that they had last season was their depth, and now they're not really going to have that as much this season. But I can't call them losers because they still have Giannis, who's going to be absolutely dominant next season and going into the future. So the future is still bright for the Milwaukee Bucks. I did think, though, that they did get a little bit worse. For me, they're still the favorites in the East, though, absolutely. As long as Giannis is there, they're definitely still favorites. I thought they prioritized kind of their contract situation and tried to save a little bit of money before they have to give Giannis his mega extension coming up next offseason over trying to go all in on this season. But it makes sense. They're a small market team, and you don't want to get stuck in financial hell if you're a small market team like them. So it does make sense from that standpoint. Again, with Giannis, they're still contenders. So I can't see them as complete losers, but it is a tough loss, a tough pill to swallow, I think, losing Brogdon. So those are my overall thoughts on the NBA offseason. It was absolutely crazy. It was ridiculous. I had a lot of fun kind of discussing my thoughts on it. I had a lot of fun with the NBA offseason as a whole, kind of just like looking at Woj bomb after Woj bomb. That was just crazy. It's one of the most exciting parts about the NBA is that you just never know what teams are going to do in the offseason when you have so many star players. It's a player-run league, and they will do what they want to play together. That's what you saw this offseason. That's one of the reasons I love the NBA, and I think the league is in a good spot right now going into this upcoming season to where it really is wide open. I know I've said that the Clippers are the number one team. They're the biggest contenders, but it really is more wide open than ever. I think this next upcoming regular season might be the best regular season in over a decade. Just a lot of really good teams out there right now, and especially the Western Conference. Western Conference is just brutal, stacked. I will come out with more videos regarding the NBA and my predictions for the NBA as we get closer to the season. But once again, thank you guys for watching and listening to this video here. I had a lot of fun again talking about the NBA, and I hope that you guys really liked what you got from me. You guys like the content. Please leave a like and subscribe below. It'll go a long way to the growth of this channel. I want to make this a big channel for you guys. I want this to be a spot where sports fans are comfortable going to discuss their opinions and just have a lot of fun discussing sports, which is what I'm all about. So once again, thanks you guys for watching, and I'll be out with another episode shortly covering the NFL. So thank you guys for watching.